He's one of the oldest preserved corpses on the planet, frozen in time, locked in ice for thousands of years. The Iceman was given a name, Ötzi, after the Ötztal mountain range where his remains were found.
He climbed into the Alps 5,000 years ago and never came back. Buried in ice, his body became a tomb, his story forgotten, until the glacier began to melt. In 1991, two hikers stumbled upon a secret frozen in time, a man perfectly preserved, carrying mysteries that would rewrite history. His DNA, his wounds, his final meal, all frozen messages waiting to be decoded. What could one man's death tell us about the world we thought we knew? And what truths has the ice been keeping silent for 5 millennia? The discovery. The morning of September 19, 1991, began like any other day in the Ötztal Alps. German tourists, Helmut and Erika Simon, were enjoying a routine trek along a glacier near the border between Austria and Italy. The weather was clear, the path was familiar. Nothing suggested that within hours they would make one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history.
They made a grisly discovery. Jutting from the ice, the head and bare shoulders of a human corpse. His left arm twisted under his body.
As they crossed a section of melting ice, something caught Erika's eye. A strange shape protruding from the glacier. At first they assumed it was debris, perhaps a backpack abandoned by another climber. But as they moved closer, the shape resolved into something far more disturbing. It was a human body, face down in the ice, remarkably intact. The Simons assumed they had found the victim of a recent mountaineering accident. These things happened in the Alps. Climbers fell into crevasses. Bodies were sometimes recovered decades later as glaciers shifted and melted.
As the glaciers in this region melt.
How close were the positions, the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians?
Unbelievably close.
They photographed the scene, marked the location, and descended the mountain to alert authorities. They had no idea that the body they had discovered was not years old or even decades old. It was millennia old, and it was about to change everything we understood about prehistoric humanity. The recovery effort that followed was chaotic. Weather conditions in the high Alps are brutal and unpredictable. The first team that reached the site could not extract the body despite using ice picks and pneumatic drills. The corpse was frozen solid, embedded in ice that had held it for longer than recorded history. They covered the remains with a protective tarp and waited for conditions to improve. In the days that followed, the site became something of a curiosity. Hikers came to look. Journalists arrived. Even legendary mountaineer Reinhold Messner made the trek to see the mysterious frozen figure. Everyone assumed the body was modern. That assumption shattered on September 22nd, when forensic expert Rainer Henn arrived to examine the remains. What he found made no sense.
The Iceman, a 5,300-year-old mummy. The Iceman was found in the Alps, in an area that it's called Ötztal Alps.
The body was not wearing modern mountaineering gear. It was dressed in fur and leather, primitive garments that clearly did not belong to any contemporary climber. Beside the body lay objects that seemed to come from another world entirely. A copper axe, a bow and quiver, a flint dagger, tools that had not been used for thousands of years. And on the skin of the corpse, visible even through the ice, were tattoos, ancient markings that predated every tattooing tradition known to modern archaeology. Henn immediately contacted archaeologist Konrad Spindler. After examining the evidence, Spindler confirmed what seemed impossible. This body was not from the modern era. It was not from the medieval period. It was not even from the Bronze Age. The frozen man in the Alps had died more than 5,000 years ago during the Copper Age, and he had been waiting in that ice ever since. The man in the ice. The body was carefully extracted and transported by helicopter to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Innsbruck. What awaited scientists there was unlike anything they had ever encountered. This was not a skeleton. This was not fragments of ancient remains pieced together from scattered bones. This was a complete human being. Skin, organs, hair, fingernails, everything preserved in extraordinary detail by the constant cold of the glacier. The man they would come to call Ötzi stood about 160 centimeters tall, roughly 5 feet 3 inches, and weighed approximately 50 kilograms. He was around 45 years old when he died. Not young by the standards of his era. His body showed the marks of a hard life lived in demanding conditions. His joints were worn. His bones showed evidence of repeated physical strain. His lungs contained soot from breathing campfire smoke. This was a man who had worked and walked and struggled through terrain that would challenge modern hikers with advanced equipment. But it was his belongings that first revealed the sophistication of his world. Ötzi was not a primitive savage stumbling through the wilderness. He was equipped with carefully crafted tools that represented the cutting edge of technology for his time. His axe was made of nearly pure copper, a material so valuable and difficult to produce that only individuals of high status would have possessed such a weapon. The blade was attached to a U-handle with leather straps and birch, tar, a combination that required knowledge of multiple materials and techniques. His bow was nearly 6 feet long, made from yew wood, though it appeared unfinished at the time of his death. His quiver contained 14 arrows, only 2 of which were ready for use. The others were still being crafted. He carried a flint dagger with an ash handle, a tool for close work and self-defense. He had a backpack with a wooden frame. He wore shoes insulated with grass, layered clothing made from the hides of multiple animals, and a bearskin cap. This was not a man caught unprepared in the mountains. This was someone equipped for extended travel in harsh conditions. The forensic examination revealed even more intimate details.
He's perfectly preserved, and he really gives us unique insights into this time that we don't know so much about. He contains a lot of information.
Analysis of his tooth enamel allowed scientists to trace where he had spent his childhood. The isotopic signatures pointed to a village called Feldthurns, just north of modern-day Bolzano in South Tyrol. Later in life, he had moved to a valley about 50 kilometers farther north. He was not a wanderer without roots. He was a man with a home, a community, a place in the world. And something had driven him high into the mountains in the final hours of his life. The DNA revelation. Around the year 2000, scientists embarked on one of the most ambitious projects in the history of paleogenetics. They would attempt to decode the DNA of a man who had been dead for 5 millennia. The challenges were immense. DNA degrades over time, breaking into smaller and smaller fragments until it becomes unreadable. Contamination from modern genetic material can overwhelm ancient samples, producing false results. And the techniques required to sequence such degraded DNA were still being developed. But Ötzi had advantages that other ancient remains did not. The constant freezing temperature of the glacier had slowed the decay of his genetic material. His cells still contained readable DNA, damaged and fragmented but present. With extreme care and sterile conditions, scientists extracted samples and began the painstaking process of reconstruction. It was like assembling a puzzle where most of the pieces had crumbled to dust, and the remaining fragments had to be identified, oriented, and connected through sophisticated computer analysis. The results, when they finally came, overturned everything researchers expected to find. The assumption had always been that Ötzi was an ancestor of the people currently living in the Alpine region. He had died there. He had lived there. Surely his descendants still walked those mountains. But the DNA told a completely different story. When scientists compared Ötzi's genetic markers with modern European populations, they found that his closest living relatives were not in Austria or Italy or anywhere near the Alps. They were on the island of Sardinia, in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, more than 1,000 kilometers to the south. This discovery forced researchers to completely rethink the population history of Europe. It suggested that the people who lived in the Alps 5,000 years ago were genetically different from the people who live there today. Sometime in the intervening millennia, those original populations had been displaced, absorbed, or replaced by waves of migration that we are only now beginning to understand. Ötzi was not an ancestor of modern Alpine Europeans. He was a remnant of a population that has largely vanished, surviving only in isolated pockets like Sardinia, where geographic isolation protected genetic lineages from being overwhelmed by later arrivals. The mitochondrial DNA, inherited only through the maternal line, revealed even more unexpected connections. Ötzi belonged to a genetic haplogroup that is now extremely rare in Europe. His maternal lineage had almost completely disappeared from the continent. Whoever his mother's people were, they had left very few descendants in the modern world. The Iceman was not just an ancient body, he was a genetic ghost, a representative of a vanished world that had been overwritten by subsequent waves of human migration. Diseases of the ancients. The DNA analysis revealed something else that stunned researchers. Ötzi was not a healthy man. Despite his active lifestyle and demanding physical existence, he suffered from multiple medical conditions that we typically associate with modern life. The most surprising discovery was evidence of atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries caused by the buildup of fatty deposits. This condition is the primary cause of heart attacks and strokes in the modern world. We blame it on sedentary lifestyles, processed foods, and the stresses of contemporary existence. Finding it in a man who lived 5,000 years ago, who walked mountains daily and ate only natural foods,
Genetic predisposition for coronary heart diseases. And this is a disease what we always believed is a modern day disease.
challenged every assumption about the origins of cardiovascular disease. The implications were profound. If atherosclerosis existed in the Copper Age, then it was not purely a product of modern civilization. There had to be genetic or environmental factors at play that transcended lifestyle choices. Ötzi's arteries showed calcification that would have increased his risk of heart attack or stroke had he lived longer. The man who survived the brutal conditions of the Alps might have been killed by his own cardiovascular system had an arrow not found him first. In 2012, further analysis revealed that Ötzi was infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, the bacterium that causes Lyme disease. This made him the oldest known case of this tick-borne infection in human history. The symptoms of Lyme disease, fatigue, fever, joint pain, and neurological problems have plagued humans for at least 5 millennia. The bacteria had been hiding in his tissues, preserved along with everything else, waiting to be discovered by scientists with technology his contemporaries could never have imagined. Genetic testing also confirmed that Ötzi was lactose intolerant. He could not digest milk as an adult. This was actually common in prehistoric populations. The ability to process dairy developed later in human history, after the domestication of cattle and goats made milk a reliable food source. Ötzi lived at the edge of this transition. He came from a world where adults did not drink milk, where the genetic mutation that allows lactose tolerance had not yet spread through the population. His diet consisted of meat, grains, and plants. Analysis of his stomach contents revealed his final meal, ibex meat, red deer, and einkorn wheat, consumed less than 2 hours before he died. Additional examination found evidence of intestinal parasites, specifically whipworm, indicating that sanitation and food preparation in the Copper Age were not always adequate to prevent infection. His teeth showed significant wear, likely from eating coarse stone-ground grains that contained particles of grit. He had cavities and gum disease. He had suffered broken ribs at some point in his life, injuries that had healed but left their marks on his skeleton. The tattoos on his body, over 60 of them, were located primarily on areas that showed evidence of joint degeneration, suggesting they may have been therapeutic rather than decorative, an ancient form of treatment for chronic pain. The mystery of his death. For years after his discovery, the cause of Ötzi's death remained unclear. Scientists assumed he had died of exposure, caught in a storm while crossing the high Alps and frozen before he could find shelter. The evidence seemed to support this theory. He was found at high altitude in a location that would have been treacherous in bad weather. His equipment suggested he was traveling, perhaps fleeing something or pursuing something across the mountains. But in 2001, a radiologist examining new X-rays of the body noticed something that had been missed for a decade. There was an arrowhead lodged in Ötzi's left shoulder. The flint point had penetrated deep into his back, severing a major blood vessel. This was not an accident. This was not exposure. Ötzi had been murdered. The revelation transformed our understanding of the Iceman's final hours. He had not simply wandered into the mountains and succumbed to the elements. He had been hunted. The arrow had struck him from behind, suggesting an ambush or pursuit. The wound would have caused massive bleeding. Death would have followed within minutes. Someone had killed this man and left him to die in the ice 5,000 years ago. The murder mystery that followed has occupied researchers ever since. Further examination revealed more evidence of violence. Ötzi had a deep cut on his right hand, a defensive wound consistent with grabbing or deflecting a blade, suggesting a struggle or fight in the hours or days before he was killed. His skull showed evidence of trauma, possibly from a fall or a blow. The scene painted by the physical. Evidence was one of conflict, pursuit, and violent death. But why? Who was Ötzi, and why would someone want him dead? His copper axe suggests he was a man of status. Such weapons were not common possessions. His equipment indicates he was prepared for a journey, not surprised by circumstances. Some researchers believe he may have been a chieftain or leader killed in a conflict over territory or resources. Others suggest he was a shepherd who wandered into the wrong territory and paid for it with his life. The truth is that we will never know for certain. The man who killed Ötzi left no confession, no explanation, no evidence beyond the arrow in his victim's back. 5,000 years later, it remains an unsolved homicide. The legacy. Today, Ötzi rests in a specially designed preservation chamber at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy.
Meticulously preserved and can be seen at the Bolzano Archaeological Museum in Italy.
The temperature is kept at precisely -6 degrees Celsius. The humidity is maintained at exactly 98%. These conditions replicate the glacier that preserved him for millennia. Visitors can view his body through a small window, looking at a face that last saw the sun when the pyramids had not yet been built, when Stonehenge was still centuries in the future, when writing itself had barely been invented. The Iceman has become one of the most studied human remains in history. Every advance in scientific technology brings new opportunities to learn from his preserved tissues. DNA sequencing techniques that did not exist when he was discovered have revealed his ancestry and his diseases. Imaging technology has mapped his internal organs without disturbing his body. Chemical analysis has traced his movements across the landscape of Copper Age Europe. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of who he was and how he lived. But perhaps the most profound impact of Ötzi's discovery is what it reveals about our assumptions regarding ancient humanity. We tend to think of prehistoric people as primitive, as fundamentally different from ourselves, as simpler beings living simpler lives. Ötzi shatters that illusion. He suffered from the same diseases that plague us today. He wore sophisticated clothing and carried advanced tools. He had a home, a community, relationships, and enemies. He ate meals and nursed injuries and dealt with chronic pain. He was, in every meaningful sense, a human being like us, separated only by time. The genetic connections between Ötzi and modern Sardinians remind us that human populations have been in constant motion throughout history. The people who live in a place today are often not descended from the people who lived there thousands of years ago. Migration, conquest, and intermixing have reshuffled human genetics repeatedly across the millennia. Ötzi represents a vanished world, a population that has largely disappeared, a genetic lineage that survives only in fragments. His DNA is a message from a lost civilization, preserved in ice and decoded by technology he could never have imagined. The science continues. The study of ancient DNA has exploded since Ötzi's genome was first sequenced, and the Iceman deserves much of the credit. Techniques developed and refined while analyzing his preserved cells have been applied to countless other ancient remains across the globe. Neanderthal. DNA has been recovered and compared with modern humans, revealing that most people alive today carry fragments of Neanderthal genetic code from interbreeding events tens of thousands of years ago. The genomes of ancient Egyptians have been reconstructed, overturning assumptions about the population history of the Nile Valley. Prehistoric Britons, vanished American populations, ancient Siberians frozen in permafrost, all of them have surrendered their genetic secrets using methods that were pioneered on the frozen man from the Alps. Each discovery adds another chapter to our understanding of human history, revealing migrations and connections that left no trace in the archaeological record, relationships between populations separated by oceans and millennia. Ötzi remains at the center of this scientific revolution, a touchstone that researchers return to again and again as new technologies emerge. His exceptional preservation makes him an ideal subject for techniques that would fail on less intact remains. New studies are published regularly, each one extracting information that previous generations of scientists could not have accessed. In recent years, researchers have moved beyond DNA to analyze the bacteria preserved in his gut. They have reconstructed the microbiome of a man who lived before antibiotics, before processed food, before refrigeration, before any of the modern factors that have fundamentally altered the microbial communities living inside human bodies. What they found was a bacterial ecosystem radically different from what exists in modern Western populations, dominated by species that have become rare or extinct in the guts of people living in industrialized societies. This discovery has profound implications for understanding how our internal ecology has changed and what we may have lost in the process. Scientists have examined the proteins preserved in his tissues, identifying molecular markers of stress and disease that DNA alone cannot reveal. Proteomics, the study of proteins, offers a different window into ancient biology. While DNA tells us what an organism could potentially become, proteins tell us what it actually was at a specific moment in time. The proteins in Ötzi's muscles and organs capture the state of his body in the hours before death, recording information about his health, his diet, and the physical stresses he was experiencing. Researchers have studied the parasites preserved in his intestines, documenting infections that plagued Copper Age populations and tracing the evolutionary history of organisms that have lived inside humans for countless generations. The technology continues to advance at a pace that would have seemed impossible when Ötzi was first discovered. Techniques that seemed like science fiction a decade ago are now routine laboratory procedures. DNA sequencing that once required years and millions of dollars can now be accomplished in days for a fraction of the cost. Imaging technology allows scientists to examine internal structures without disturbing the remains. Chemical analysis can trace the origins of materials with extraordinary precision. And methods that do not yet exist will someday be applied to Ötzi's tissues, extracting information that we cannot currently imagine or predict. This is what makes the Iceman so valuable. He is not just a snapshot of the past frozen at a single moment in time. He is a continuing source of discovery, a scientific resource that becomes more valuable as our ability to study him improves. Every advance in technology opens new possibilities for understanding who he was and how he lived. The questions we cannot answer today may be solved by techniques developed tomorrow. Ötzi has already taught us more about prehistoric humanity than anyone could have predicted when two hikers stumbled onto his body in 1991. And he is far from finished.
Archaeological finds, the body of a Bronze Age mountaineer, which scientists believe could be 4,000 years old.
The frozen man still has secrets to share. We just need to develop the tools to hear them. Ötzi's story does not end in a museum display. Every cut in his flesh, every artifact at his side, every strand of DNA is a message from a world we thought was lost. And yet, for all we have learned, the ice still has secrets we cannot yet read. How many other lives lie frozen, waiting for the right moment or the right tools to speak? What will they tell us about who we are, where we come from, and the shadows of human nature that stretch back millennia? The past is not gone. It is waiting. And the question is whether we are ready to listen.